This week marks more than 80 years since a dark chapter in American history unfolded. I'm sharing you with King 5's Facing Race team. With the sweep of a pen, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942, which forcibly removed more than 120,000 people of Japanese descent from their homes, incarcerating them in concentration camps. We're looking at the impact of this order on communities and people across the western United States. John Bartell with our sister station in Sacramento and Mark Curtis from our sister station in Phoenix meet up with survivors as they revisit incarceration sites in California and Arizona.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
There had been a friction well before World War II.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, often referred to as the Japanese Relocation Act.
They couldn't figure out who was loyal to Japan, and if you looked like the enemy, you were suspect.
In a matter of months, more than 120,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly removed from their homes and bused to one of 10 different internment camps built in the western United States.
I would have dreams, and I had dreams into my adulthood.
One of those internment camps was Manzanar in southeastern California.
It just brings back all these strange emotions.
On land that was raw, untamed, but full of opportunity. Here they would build schools, educate their children, reclaim the desert.
Rooms were basically 20 by 25. You had three things. You had a cot for each person, a stove, and a light bulb. That's it.
The federal government told the Japanese that the internment camps were for their own safety and kept them there for over 3 years.
For me, even as a 7-year-old kid, camp was to me barbed wire and guard towers.
A lot of the people who were incarcerated at Manzanar were...
Every year, members of the Florin chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League make a pilgrimage from Sacramento to Manzanar National Historic Site, a dusty, wind-beaten plot of land just outside of Death Valley.
It was a trip that turned into a pilgrimage.
Few internment camps are as well preserved as Manzanar. That's why Stanley Umeda makes his pilgrimage here instead of Jerome, Arkansas, where he and his family were incarcerated. This is his 15th visit.
I recall this place more as a place of honor than of disgrace, because this is where we survived.
We are setting a standard for the rest of the world in the treatment of people who may have loyalties to an enemy nation.
Despite the propaganda put out by the federal government, survival here was hard, and conditions were not good.
Oh yeah, right from the beginning, it was hell for them. First, not knowing exactly why, especially the Issei, since they couldn't speak English. There's Dad, George Kiyoshi, Dorothy Kazue Yamamoto, Georgette, there's Georgette's name.
Gary Yamamoto's parents grew up farming in the Sacramento Valley. Before meeting, they were both forced to abandon their homes and move here.
They were just, overwhelmed when they had to pack up everything in 48 hours to carry as much as you could.
Privacy at Manzanar was basically non-existent. Public toilets had no walls, the makeshift shelters had no partitions, and everybody was exposed to the elements. But despite the conditions, Gary's parents found love.
This is where they met, this is where they fell in love, and this is where they got married.
This is Gary's first trip to Manzanar. His mother and father spoke very little about their experience, but he does remember stories of their wedding night.
Their honeymoon was where the rest of the family kind of moved over to one of the other family's barracks temporarily so that my mother and father could have some privacy on their wedding night.
This was put on the health and care of these American children of Japanese descent.
The children who were sent to internment camps are some of the only incarcerated living people today. In the 1940s, the federal government's propaganda painted a rosy picture of their treatment inside these camps. But throughout her childhood, Christine had nightmares from the ill treatment she received.
But essentially the dream was being placed in a panel truck without windows. They slam the door, it's black and screaming. That's my dream.
The nightmare that Christine had comes from her memory of catching pneumonia and being forced to recover in a hospital alone. After that recovery, Christine and her family were relocated to 2 different camps, Tulare, California, and Topaz, Utah. Like many children in these internment camps, trauma followed Christine, but she feels the need to visit these internment camps so she can share her story.
For a teenager, you can imagine that privacy was the biggest issue. I think, so what? This happened to us, but what is the lesson to be learned? In 42, we didn't have a voice. We didn't have political leaders. No one supported us. They didn't know us. And so the thing that we want to say is, we have a voice now. We need to stand up, speak out for ourselves and for others.
Here today to right a grave wrong. We must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake.
It would take more than 40 years for the federal government to admit they were wrong. In 1988, President Reagan signed a bill giving surviving members of the internment camps reparations of $20,000.
They have never apologized for anything. This is the first apology, and that meant so much to get that letter of apology.
The unthinkable happened today. The World Trade Center, both towers, gone.
Just 13 years after President Reagan's apology, America almost made the same mistake again.
Preventative campaign of arrest and detection of lawbreakers. America has grown stronger and safer.
Our country has not really learned, because during 9/11, they were already considering rounding up Muslims.
Manzanar National Historic Site is here for the people to remember.
Yeah, I'm going to have such a much deeper appreciation for the way my ancestors withstood this.
A site to remember the wrongs that the federal government committed towards Japanese living in America.
Those of us who have survived these camps must share in order so that it will not happen again.
From Manzanar National Historic Site, I'm John Bartell.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
War, it seems, is always happening somewhere. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, the world would once again become soaked in the blood of its sons and daughters as the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, bringing America into World War II. It's hard to believe in this desolate stretch of desert that Arizona's second largest city once stood. It's a city that popped up almost overnight after an incident 2,700 miles away in Pearl Harbor, and then 3 years later, just as quickly, it was gone.
Well, again, I'm looking back at what happened.
Dick Matsuishi doesn't remember much about that time.
And as an adult, I'm wondering how this could have happened.
He was only 4 on that February day in 1942, when President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066.
A state of war.
An order meant to calm the fears of millions of Americans in the wake of Pearl Harbor and a growing mistrust of Japanese Americans.
What's it say on the bottom?
June 1943.
Okay.
Built by Japanese residents.
Yeah. That's the one.
Right here.
Dick and his family and thousands of other Japanese Americans were rounded up, put on a bus, and forced to sell their homes and businesses, and then shipped off to internment camps across the western U.S. One of them was the Poston Camp on the Colorado River Indian Reservation near Parker, Arizona.
They found out it was war hysteria, prejudice, and lack of political leadership. And I think that's probably one of the major ones, was the lack of political leadership. It should have never happened.
As you look around at what's left of the camp, you can't help but hear the footsteps, feel the confusion of those men, women, and children suddenly confined, all wondering, how could our country do this to us? And while many felt that way, Dick was only 4 years into his life.
Well, looking back, I had a ball. Because I was young, I didn't know what was going on. I did what my parents told me to do. I played with kids that were my same ethnicity, and we had a good time because we didn't know any better.
The months at Poston turned into years. Christmases came and went. Romances were kindled. Children were born. And for Dick's father, who had been a farmer in California, the family was guided by a simple Japanese belief.
Yeah, there's a term called shikataganai, and that is basically what you indicated. If something happens that you have no control over, you try to do the best you can with what you have.
1946.
And so it went, until June of 1946, when President Harry Truman issued another executive order, this time allowing all of the Japanese prisoners to go home. But to what? The vast majority had to start over.
There's a few that are bitter. They will never forget what happened and never forgive the government for doing it. But I think most of us think, hey, it's in the past, it's gone. Just make sure it doesn't happen again.
As for Dick, well, he returned home to Southern California, went to school, became a dentist, and married the love of his life, who was from Arizona, and the place where he was once incarcerated as a young boy became his home.
It's been a good life. I met my wife, who's from Arizona, and that's how I'm here. And we've had a good life. We've had 3 girls, and we've got 5 grandchildren, and we're pretty close, and they're all doing good.
The grave history of the incarceration of Japanese Americans has been preserved in historical artifacts and some in unlikely places. The Facing Race team reveals how a Seattle hotel holds a secret history of those imprisoned. And Gary Shapiro with our sister station in Denver uncovers a diary that shows how the injustice unfolded.
That the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7, 1941,
and every night there were searchlights searching all the barbed wires.
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Sturdy like Mount Fuji watching over Japan, the Panama Hotel watches over Seattle's Nihonmachi, our very own Japantown. Jan Johnson maintains the 102 rooms inside, each one a perfect preservation of the past, open to the public.
I'm just passing through like the custodian.
Many can tell by its original 40s furniture, carpet, and light-filled architecture that Seattle's Japanese American history lives in these details. But the basement of the Panama holds secrets only a few know about.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Below street level are items left behind by Japanese Americans forced to leave their homes and enter internment camps during World War II. The move was so swift, the Panama Hotel became a temporary storage facility for people in the area.
This should all be museum.
Johnson had no connections to Japanese Americans 38 years ago when she bought the hotel from its original owners, Mr. and Mrs. Takashi Hori.
When I said I wanted to buy it, I had no credit, unemployed, single, female, Caucasian, was going to buy this building downtown, and never had a hotel or a business. But I just knew it needed to be saved, and it still needs to be saved.
It's not just the Panama. Other hotels in the International District hold key narratives for Japanese Americans.
This is a picture of before we returned from camp.
90-year-old Shikichi Takeda grew up in the International District.
My parents ran a hotel down there called the Cadillac Hotel, and so that's where we lived.
When Takeda was 8, Executive Order 9066, signed by President Franklin Roosevelt, ripped his family away from the Cadillac Hotel and sent them to Hunt, Idaho, to concentration camp Minidoka. Many Japanese Americans from the Pacific Northwest were imprisoned there for years.
We were surrounded by barbed wire with sentries, and the sentries were manned by U.S. Army personnel, and their guns were facing in towards us.
When the family returned to Seattle after nearly 3 years, they had nothing, nowhere to live. To get back on their feet, they turned to another hotel. This time, a makeshift hotel inside the Japanese language school that's now also a cultural center in the CID.
Mom and Dad's 2 bunk beds were put together right here.
Nicknamed the Hunt Hotel, it housed over 20 families. What is it like when you come here?
Here?
Yeah.
This is my home out of the camp, so it's nostalgic because it helped me get started in the city life.
This one room was the kitchen.
Kurt Takeda, Shikichi's son, says he didn't learn about his family's traumatic past in detail until well into his adult life. When Kurt was in school, he says his teachers whitewashed the racism that took place.
This was never taught in school. No. I wrote an article in a journalism class when I was a senior in high school, and I said it was a concentration camp. Journalist teacher said it was never a concentration camp. There was never machine guns or guards.
Kurt says experiences like that, the rewriting of history, make keeping the truth even more important. Even the stories inside the most modest of Seattle hotels need to be preserved.
You leave people with blanks or gaps in the history, and if they don't learn from their previous mistakes, they're going to repeat it.
It's a little book that tells a big story. This is Daisy Osumi's diary. And on December 7th, 1941, she wrote, "Oh, what a day. Japan has declared war on us. It will sure be bad for us here in America." She was not wrong. We've all seen the pictures and heard the stories. Stories about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor 80 years ago that plunged the U.S. into World War II. But Daisy's diary tells that story from a different perspective. She was a Japanese American living in Denver.
Japanese Americans were both shocked and horrified when the attack on Pearl Harbor happened and they found out about it.
Daisy lived at a house at 1137 Larimer that is not there anymore. It's the Auraria campus now. But it probably looked a lot like one of the old houses still on the campus today. According to her diary, she and her husband owned a jewelry store at 2010 Larimer Street.
There were dozens and dozens of Japanese-owned businesses, Japanese-American-owned businesses. Pharmacies, grocery stores. My wife's family ran a grocery store at 23rd and Larimer, which is a hip brew pub now.
Sakura Square now sits in that area, not too far from Coors Field. Most of the Japanese-owned businesses around it are gone. Journalist and author Gil Asakawa says, when we entered the war, most younger Japanese people were citizens.
By 1941, there was a generation of American-born Japanese who were citizens. And citizens by birth, American citizens by birth.
Daisy's diary talks about her husband Harry working with the FBI, so she had to take care of the store. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the FBI was known for harassing Japanese Americans. Racial intolerance was everywhere, including in Denver.
Racial epithets hurled at them. It actually is not that different from the anti-Asian attacks that have been going on in the last year here in the United States.
As bad as all that was, the treatment of Japanese Americans during the war will always be defined by places like this, the internment camp called Amachi in southeastern Colorado. Through an executive order by President Franklin Roosevelt, 110,000 Japanese Americans, mostly from the West Coast, were forced into 10 camps across the country. 7,000 of them ended up at Amachi. Marion Takahara was one of them.
As a 16, 17-year-old, you begin to wonder, why? Why am I here? And that was my home. And it was awful.
But the people in the camps made the best of it. They lived in barracks, formed schools, planted gardens, had beauty parlors and Boy Scout troops. And some of the kids, remember they were U.S. citizens, joined the military and fought and died for the country that locked up their parents.
The one thing that I think I wish that non-Japanese would have learned from the World War II experience is that it was wrong.
It's the story of racial injustice, a dark time in U.S. history, a story told in Daisy Osumi's diary.
The first people to be removed under Executive Order 9066 were in Washington State on Bainbridge Island. Survivors share with King 5 what it was like.
Look closely over the water, and you'll find a murky chapter of American history that started on this beautiful island.
All Japanese persons, both alien and non-alien, will be evacuated from this area.
This memorial on Bainbridge Island is dedicated to the Japanese American residents who were exiled from the community, forced into internment camps.
And they didn't dare say citizens because they knew at the time that what they were doing was wrong.
Lily Kitamoto Kodama was 7 years old in 1941, the year Japanese forces bombed Pearl Harbor. In the following weeks, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the forcible removal and imprisonment of more than 120,000 Japanese Americans and immigrants.
We were the first to be taken away.
Deemed enemy aliens, Lily and her family were among roughly 300 Bainbridge Island residents that would be imprisoned for the duration of the war.
I saw all my aunties and my cousins, and I saw real soldiers with guns.
Trauma Lily still feels today about a history she fears may be forgotten.
There are still people who don't know that this happened.
Back on Bainbridge Island,
so there's a lot of photographs.
Lily fills in the blanks on what her family endured. They were given 6 days' notice to pack up a few of their belongings.
That's me, my mama, my sister Frances, my baby sister Jane, my brother Frank, and we're all holding one toy that my mama said we could take.
Lily and her family moved into barracks, surrounded by barbed wire, watched 24/7 by armed guards.
I happened to find a creek. It was inside the barbed wire. So I took off my shoes and I was going to wade in this creek, and then I heard something, and I looked up, and here it was a guard tower was right there, and there was a soldier, and he had a gun, and he was looking down and pointing it at me, and that scared me. It made me feel that wasn't acceptable as an American.
By 1945, most Japanese Americans were allowed to return to their homes, only to find more hate waiting for them.
As we're walking on the sidewalk, this Caucasian man came up behind us and said, "Why don't you go back where you came from, you blankly blank Japs?" And I'm going to turn around and say, "I'm not a Jap." After that, I really bent over backwards to prove I'm an American.
While distance and time can fade memory, Lily warns those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
Could this happen again?
Well, because the government is made up of people and people can make mistakes. I like to believe that most people are still basically good. And so that gives me hope.
It's so important to remember this time in American history because, as survivors have told us, if we forget it, we could repeat it. Thanks for joining us.